Of course.
Hi everyone, I've got Geoff Marshall here with me. He's the head of performance at Sevenoaks. Geoff very kindly got in contact with me about writing a guidance paper for student athletes, which he's done. It's fantastic, and I'll obviously share that with this video. But just thought we'd have a little chat and share with you some of the things that Geoff has found out about working with the student athletes. So first of all, thanks very much for joining us, Geoff. Maybe you can just tell us about how you came to write this paper.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, so I guess let me start with what actually prompted both my doctoral research and the guidance paper. So there's a huge body of research on what supports excellence in sport, and in our context, what supports the development of student athletes. Most of it points towards three big areas. So they're quality coaching, strong psychological skills, and a supportive talent development environment. But what I have noticed was very little research considering what happens when a young person is moving between multiple environments. So that might be school sport, club sport, and performance pathways, the topic of this guidance paper. And when they're navigating those contexts in parallel or simultaneously. But that experience is what almost every talented student in an independent school will experience.
Yeah.
So that's where the gap has emerged, and where the guidance paper hopefully provides some pillars towards supporting how we can navigate this
Yes, brilliant.
as staff who facilitate like student athlete development and talent development, not just within the four walls of school sport, but also understanding where we fit within the wider picture.
And you said that you'd sort of identified five key principles, if you like. So obviously the point of these Tuesday takeaways is to support directors of sport in any way we can. So what would those key pillars do? And without giving too much away, because obviously we want to encourage people to read the guidance paper, but what would be your top tips for directors of sport and their teams?
So just before I do share the five key pillars, the I conducted some research last year, and I interviewed 10 student athletes at school, at Seven Oaks School, and I spoke to them at the start of each term to understand how they navigate school sport, club sport, and their performance pathway commitments alongside their academics. We talked about their expectations for each term, how they anticipate managing their training load and schoolwork, who supports them, what role parents and role models play, and also where tensions or conflicts tend to appear.
Yeah.
So what came through quite clearly in those conversations were largely they were left to independently navigate that experience or
Mm.
orchestrate their experience across those environments, and that there were some barriers to coherence. So things like misalignment of expectations between each context or each environment, inconsistent communication, or simply just not knowing
Yeah.
who's responsible for what. So those insights have shaped much of the guidance paper, and just I guess the five key principles. Firstly, number one, so I've titled it complementary coexistence. How can each environment add developmental value through difference, not duplication?
Yeah.
The second one, clarifying roles and remits. So again, each environment must define or at least understand. It doesn't have to be an explicit, distinct definition, but understanding your specific developmental contribution to the student athlete. Number three, empowering the student athlete as an orchestrator. They're the common denominator between the contexts, but how can we better facilitate that? And part of it is helping them develop psycho behavioral skills
Yeah.
to enable them to navigate between these systems. Um, Number four, integration through communication. So alignment and coherence around their development between contexts, rather than the student athlete remaining the sole mediator between stakeholders and different coaches and performance pathways in school sport and club sport. And then the last one, number five, uh, working towards the balance between challenge and support. So holistic environments are important to sustain both well-being and long-term progression. So that's just optimizing periods of challenge, which inevitably there will be, but also periods of support. So a push and pull between those different experiences, and also being proactive around that rather than just reacting to periods of overload or stress or
Yeah.
mismanagement or miscommunication. Can we set up some pillars of support that we can turn the volume up and down against, depending on the time of the year or the different priorities for both school sport and pathway sport? So that's the kind of the 5 key principles that I pulled out from the research I conducted last year.
Yeah, great. And I remember you and I spoke before, and I've spoken to Fionn Thompson at Leeds Beckett a bit about this. And very similarly, I think people need to be proactive here, don't they? As you say, you're meeting everyone at the start of the term. Even if you met at the beginning of September, this student, if they're in year 11, is going to have mock exams there. They've got a training camp there. They've got a big school fixture there. If you can be proactive, that must be a massive help. What sort of ways have you found that proactivity has aided the student?
So I guess it's anchored from reflecting forward as far as possible. So what
Yeah,
is in the calendar that we are aware of already and we can work backwards from? So
yeah,
almost that principle of reverse engineering performance. What is important? It might be pathway selection. It might be a national tournament or training camps every week or every month, and mapping that against, okay, what are the priorities in the school sport calendar,
mm,
so that we're aware of when there might be some crossover and what we can do about it in advance,
mm.
um, rather than reacting the week of or the day
Agreed.
before. But Fion's work is great because it provides like lots of detail around the experience of student athletes within the 4 walls of the school environment. But again, I guess the extension of this work is that those student athletes don't exist in isolation to school sport. Their development continues across club environments and pathway contexts. So how can we better manage that and facilitate that? Because especially when we see them 6 days a week, or if they're boarders, like as often as we do, how can we lead that facilitation, and collaborate better with performance pathways, ultimately to create more alignment or better, more coherent alignment between all stakeholders
Yeah.
connected to their development.
And I suppose as well, obviously, I'm a great fan of Kath Bishop's The Long Win. And, this is what we are looking at, isn't it? Is giving the athlete those tools so that, let's face it, when they're going to be performing at their best, which is probably going to be in their 20s, that we can reflect and hopefully gain some pride in how we've helped along the journey. And you and I was saying when I went to King Edward's Whitley last year with Phil Miller, and he was telling me about Toby Roberts, who won a gold medal at the Olympics in the speed climbing. And he said, look, we did nothing to help his climbing. But what we did was we made sure we had online meetings with him. We marked his work. He sent it in online. And when he was at school, we celebrated him. But we also made it clear that, he shouldn't be anxious about missing school, or guilty. And sometimes it's not just the practical sport support, is it? It's the emotional and social support as well.
Yeah, and I think the nuances around the different types of sport and the different types of independent school environments, so the
Yeah.
ethos, the culture, the infrastructure available for the development of the students, it just depends.
Yes.
Sometimes it's the holistic approach we need to turn the volume up on,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
some schools maybe it is the performance part of the sport. It just
Yeah.
depends on the context and the where the student is in their developmental pathway, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the context, like you say, that's very important. In fact, crucial. And I would suggest that hopefully your guidance paper can just upskill some directors of sport and give them some advice as to how can we do the best for our student. And obviously, having someone like you who's worked in this area and studied it is extremely helpful. What
Well,
just to finish then? Sorry, go on.
just on that again, translating that guidance paper into practice, I would approach it as almost like a traffic light system. So if you rag rate red, amber, green,
Yeah,
the different principles that I put together on the paper, red being this doesn't happen in our context,
yeah,
we need to start, green being we do this really well already, and amber somewhere in between the two.
yeah,
It's almost like an audit of where you're currently at against the
yeah,
pillars or the principles that I put together.
yeah,
And then some you might have lots of opportunity to improve, others you might not for various different reasons.
yeah,
But just a simple rag rating system
yeah,
to map where you're currently at against what potentially you could achieve.
yeah.
I think that's a very simple way of approaching the document initially.
That's great advice, isn't it? It's a bit like when, I think when we go to other schools, for example, sometimes we think, oh, you know what, I'm gonna nick that idea, but then there are other things you think, actually, we do this pretty well. And let's face it, we've all got, as you say, red, amber, green. So yeah, I think that's a fantastic bit of advice. So just to finish, Geoff, how would you suggest directors of sport use this guidance paper and disseminate that information to their teams?
So I guess firstly, it's about identifying what students are relevant to this kind of process of support. So that might be your sports scholars, it might be your performance students, whatever title you attach to student athletes that will coexist
Yeah,
between school environments and performance pathways. Identify who the students are, identify the stakeholders around them, and then, as I mentioned, reflecting forward as far as possible throughout the academic year to see um, what their priorities are, whether that's pathway selection processes, training camps, national competitions against the school sport calendar, um, and working backwards so that you can reverse engineer performance or reverse engineer development and be really coherent around that communication and the alignment of what's expected and when, because at different times expectations will be different.
yeah.
But let's just make sure or help to make sure that each stakeholder is aware of the roles and the responsibilities and the remits of different contexts and different stakeholders, depending on where they're at in the academic year, I guess.
Brilliant. Well, listen, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat this morning, but also to the work you must have put in on that guidance paper. It's much appreciated, and I hope it helps other people in their school. So, as I say, thank you very much, and I hope everyone looks forward to reading your paper.
Thanks, Chris.